Michael Jackson, a psychoanalysis. So, um, this is what my intuition has told me about Michael Jackson. And, I like Michael Jackson, don't get me wrong. I thought he was very talented. I mean, that's no denying. Um, but I'm going to be brutally honest. So, let's start in chronological order. So, his father, Joe Jackson, apparently, he said before he died, that his own father was domineering and controlling to the point where he felt like he didn't have any friends and he was lonely. Now, later on in life, he then goes on to marry Michael Jackson's mother, and they have several kids. I think they had about 10, one of which tragically died in infancy, I believe, or when it was young. Um, and then, long story short, he then goes on to form a pop group out of five of the siblings called the Jackson Five. Um, Funnily enough, given how Joe Jackson described his own father, Michael Jackson described his own father as domineering and controlling and violent. And also said that in childhood he felt lonely and isolated. Now, it is undoubtedly the case, as Michael Jackson has said himself in the past, before he died, obviously, that his dad was violent. But from Joe Jackson's perspective, it was just him enforcing discipline as a father. And it is the case that back, in previous generations, they thought nothing of using violence in order to kind of control their children. I mean, my father's mother's father used to knock seven bells of shit out of my grandmother and her 13 siblings. Um, I think once she got battered for whistling on a Sunday. I mean, her father was from an Irish Catholic background. Um, and they thought nothing of it. Now, it would be outlawed. It would be an outrageous act of child abuse, that level of violence. But back then, the state kind of turned a blind eye to it because children needed a sharp shock and needed to be disciplined. So Joe Jackson probably, and in his head, he might not have thought he was necessarily doing anything wrong. That was just how he disciplined his kids, but it involved violence, and he was also a bully. So he would pick on, I think, Michael Jackson in particular. Now, probably for two reasons, because Michael Jackson was the youngest member of the Jackson Five, and he was therefore the smallest, and because of that, he was the cutest. So he was the one that the public sort of, oh, isn't he cute? Oh, Michael, yeah, yeah. He's like really talented, cute little kid. So probably Joe Jackson put a bit more pressure on him. But also, what the bullies do, they pick on the weakest and the most vulnerable. So he's going to be picking on, if he's going to pick on any of his kids, it's going to be the smallest one, because that's what bullies do. And I suspect that the reason why Joe Jackson was a bully is because his own father was also a bully. And this is what I've said before about reverse karma. What happens to you, you end up unwittingly doing to someone else. Anyway, so one of the things that Joe Jackson used to tease Michael about was his flat nose. Now, this is quite surprising because Joe, was an African American, and obviously, you know, uh, because of genetics, African Americans, the noses are flatter than Europeans. Um, but maybe it was because he's small. I don't know, but Joe seemed to pick on that in particular. Um, so anyway, fast forward to Michael Jackson having a successful solo career as an artist. Suddenly, his nose changes, and it becomes thinner. I'm going back to round about the Thriller days of Thriller. Still, he's clearly an African American, but his nose is different. His nose has changed. Now, apparently, he said that he sustained a injury to his nose and had some plastic surgery to correct that, hence the new nose. This is a lie, as far as I'm concerned, and I think in particular it's a lie because of other things he said later on that have been a lie. With all the respect to the man, it was clear that what happened is once he got money, once he'd become a successful artist in himself, I suspect when he was with the Jackson 5, Dad was pocketing a lot of the money as the so-called, manager. But once he had a solo career in his own right and the serious money started coming in, that's when he thought, right, I'm going to get a nose job here, which is what I've always wanted because I've always hated my nose. And the reason he always hated his nose is because his father picked on that in particular. So he gets a nose job done. Now, apparently, the story, the official story is that because he broke his nose and he had the plastic surgery, he then got a bit of a taste for plastic surgery all the more. But I think, like I say, he'd always got that intention to have some plastic surgery on his nose and also to make himself whiter. Because I think that Joe, by saying that about his nose, made him think to himself, oh, well, the reason I've got this flat nose is because I am African American. So not only did he become ashamed of his nose, but by extension, he then became ashamed of his own race. So then, over the course of his career, he starts turning whiter. So, he's like friends and his fans will no doubt say, well, yes, but that's because he had a skin condition called vitiligo, which makes your skin whiten. Well, again, another lie, because vitiligo, I know because my grandmother had vitiligo, it creates patches of lighter skin. Now, I don't think Michael Jackson ever denied this. I think he acknowledged that apparently it caused lighter skin. So what he said is, well, he would cover it up by lightening all the rest of his skin so he appeared lighter. But here's the thing, right? If you're an African American, you have dark skin, and you have a skin condition that makes your skin lighter, then surely if you're going to cover it up, you're going to make all your skin, but the lighter patches, darker, because that is who you are. You identify as a black person, a person of color. So, you're not going to you would black up the light bits. What you're not going to do is you're not going to keep the white bits and and lighten all the dark bits. So that's a lie. How he was able to do it, I don't know. Whether it was makeup or chemicals, like drugs he was taking, I don't know. But clearly, the intention was to make himself, over the course of his career, become more white. Now, you also see this with his kids. He supposedly had, well, he's got kids, right? I'm led to believe that, I could be wrong here, but he always maintained that those were his own kids, like his biological kids, which he had with, white women, white woman. I'm a bit vague on who he got married to or he had a relationship to. You'll have to tell me in the comment section. But his children didn't come out mixed race. They all came out 100% white. So again, we showed that he was denying, he didn't want black kids. He wanted white kids. And this is reflected in his 1992 song, It Doesn't Matter If You're Black or White. Ironically, a big hit, but ironic given the fact that he wanted to make himself white. But what he was doing here was that this is what we call, if anyone is familiar with Carl Jung, this is him communicating, talking to his shadow self. So deep down, it did matter to him a lot what race he was. And he didn't like, because of this teasing about his nose, he didn't like being black and he wanted to be a white person. So it did matter to him whether he was black or white. So what he's doing is he's talking to himself by singing, it don't matter if you're black or white. He was talking to himself. And for anyone who isn't familiar with the concept of the shadow self, basically he was talking to himself. He just didn't realize he was doing it. He was trying to communicate with his own subconscious mind, trying to say, look, it don't matter. You don't need to change who you are. Just be yourself. All right. So then we go on to the sexual allegations. So now, poor old Michael Jackson, right? He was never, because of his dad trying to engineer this pop group at a time when Michael was very small, he never had a normal childhood. He was never allowed to have a normal childhood, play with kids, like any other child did. So, what does he do? He spends his adult life trying to make up for lost time. So he creates this Never Never Land. And he, he's hanging out with other, he's hanging out with kids, grown man hanging out with kids like Macaulay Culkin and whatever. And it all seems very innocent, and I'm sure on that level, it was basically Michael just wanted to have the childhood that he'd never been allowed to have. So that's why he hanging around with kids. So in that sense, it was all innocent. But what is suspicious, given the allegations about from like the parents of these children, yes, you could argue that they were trying to extort money out of Michael Jackson by making lies up, but there was evidence where the police found, I think, child pornography in his mansion, but also I believe that's the case. Correct me if I'm wrong, but also the more damning evidence, which is the parents were paid off. Now, if he was genuinely not guilty, he would have fought it, like anyone who's genuinely innocent. Fought it. We're like, prove it then. I've got all this money. Prove it. I'll wipe the floor with you. What you're saying about me is slanderous, and about child abuse. I'm going to take you to court. I'm going to wipe the floor with you. But no, it pays him off. Pays him off. Only that could mean an admission of guilt, because he would know that the evidence then would, if it's actually happening, the evidence is there, whether it's the testimony of the kid or other circumstantial evidence, whatever. So he quietly pays them off. So I believe it was going on. So maybe, was his own father an abuser? I mean, there wasn't any evidence of that in that way. I think, he was married, Joe at the time. So, I doubt it, but you never know. I don't know. But I do believe this in the sexual abuse allegations. But that was conflated with a genuine desire for him to spend time hanging out with kids, like having that childhood that Joe had never allowed him to have. And I think towards the end of his life, bear in mind he only died at the age of 50, I think he was trying to keep that career going. I mean, the amount of energy and endurance it would take to keep up all those shows and gigs and doing all the dance routines. I mean, I'm 53 next week. I mean, I get out of breath walking to the shops these days. And I think he was taking like sedative medication and painkillers, and of course this irresponsible doctor, because this is how it works in the United States. It's more about, look, I'm a doctor, whatever you want, I'll get it for you. There's less of that kind of professional integrity, should we say, in the United States. No offense to anyone in the United States. It's just your country is more about money. And it's about I can get you whatever you want, money talks. In the UK, it's more about, well, in my professional opinion, this isn't wise, Michael. As your doctor, this dose exceeds the limits for this, medication, and I do think you need some rest as well. So that doctor got dragged through the coals. I remember seeing the court footage. So yeah, he just burned himself out young. But essentially, I know I've kind of like, talked about the all the dirt and whatever, but essentially he was a good man. It was just he followed the tragic course of a lot of child stars. It ended up destroying him. Um, and I'll probably do a separate video on this, but he's certainly not the only child star that has got messed up psychologically. So yeah.